They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when your own blood becomes poison? What happens when the person you trusted most becomes the architect of your destruction? My name is Elena, and this is the story of how my sister smiled while she buried me alive. And how I clawed my way back from that grave to show her what real darkness looks like. Let me take you back to where it all started. 3 months ago. The day my world shattered into 1,000 pieces, and nobody even noticed I was bleeding. Picture this. A Tuesday afternoon in late June. The kind of day where the sun feels too bright, almost mocking. I was sitting in my childhood bedroom, staring at the acceptance letter from the medical program I'd been dreaming about since I was 12 years old. My hands were shaking. Not from excitement. From fear. Because I knew what was coming. See, my parents had always been traditional. Old money. Old values. The kind of people who believed inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. About proving your worth. And for 26 years, I'd been trying to prove mine. My sister Victoria was different. 3 years younger than me, but somehow always 3 steps ahead in my parents' eyes. She had this way about her. This charm that made everyone in the room gravitate toward her like she was the sun and we were all just satellites in her orbit. While I spent my nights studying organic chemistry and human anatomy, Victoria spent hers at gallery openings and charity galas, networking with people who could elevate the family name. Mom and Dad loved that about her. They called it social intelligence. I called it something else, but I kept my mouth shut. The inheritance wasn't supposed to be complicated. Grandma Catherine had left everything in a trust. $3 million, the estate in Connecticut, and her shares in the family business. The will was clear. It would be split between Victoria and me on my 27th birthday, which was exactly 2 months away. All I had to do was wait. But that Tuesday, everything changed. I came downstairs for dinner, still clutching that acceptance letter, ready to share my good news. The dining room was set like always. Crystal glasses. White tablecloth. Fresh flowers in the center. Mom was already seated, wearing her pearl necklace. Dad was pouring wine. And Victoria was glowing. That should have been my first warning. I sat down, and before I could even open my mouth, Victoria cleared her throat. She had this smile on her face. The kind of smile that made my stomach drop even though I didn't know why yet. I have an announcement, she said, her voice dripping with false humility. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but Mom and Dad insisted we celebrate together as a family. Mom reached over and squeezed Victoria's hand. Dad was beaming like she'd just won the Nobel Prize. Victoria has been working on something extraordinary, Dad said, his voice thick with pride. Something that's going to change everything for this family. I set down my fork. My appetite was already gone. Victoria pulled out a folder. Thick. Official looking. She slid it across the table to me with that same smile. That same goddamn smile that I would come to see in my nightmares. I've been in talks with a development company, she explained, her tone so casual, so practiced. They want to turn Grandma's Connecticut estate into a luxury wellness resort. Eco-friendly. High-end. The kind of place that celebrities and executives would pay thousands per night to stay at. I stared at the folder. I didn't touch it. That's Grandma's house, I said quietly. That's our inheritance. Exactly, Victoria continued, leaning forward like she was about to let me in on some wonderful secret. And instead of just letting it sit there, collecting dust and property taxes, we could turn it into something profitable. Something that honors Grandma's memory while also securing our family's financial future. Mom nodded enthusiastically. Victoria has really thought this through, Elena. She's been working with lawyers and architects for months. Months. The word came out sharper than I intended. You've been planning this for months. Victoria didn't even flinch. I wanted to make sure it was viable before I brought it to the family. I didn't want to get everyone's hopes up for nothing. But the will, I said, my voice starting to shake. Grandma's will specifically states that the estate can't be sold or developed without both of our consent. We both have to agree. That's true, Dad interjected, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he was going to stand up for what was right. Maybe he was going to remind Victoria that this wasn't just her decision to make. But then he said the words that would haunt me for months. Which is why we're hoping you'll see reason and sign off on this. It's what's best for everyone, Elena. Think about the family. Think about the family. As if I'd been thinking about anything else my entire life. I looked down at the folder. Inside were documents, contracts, development plans. And there, on the last page, was a signature line with my name typed underneath it. They'd already prepared everything. They'd already decided. This dinner wasn't an announcement. It was an ambush. What do I get out of this? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. Victoria's smile widened. You'd get your share of the profits, of course. The development company estimates the resort could generate upwards of 10 million in the first 5 years alone. Split between us, that's much more than what you'd get from just inheriting half of a house and some stocks. And if I say no? The room went silent. Mom set down her wine glass. Dad's jaw tightened. And Victoria? Victoria just kept smiling. Why would you say no? Mom asked, her tone carrying just a hint of warning. Victoria has worked so hard on this. She's thinking about the family legacy. About building something meaningful. Grandma loved that house, I said, my hands clenching into fists under the table. She wanted us to have it. To keep it in the family. Not turn it into some luxury resort for strangers. Grandma would want us to be smart, Victoria countered smoothly. She was a businesswoman. She understood investment and growth. This isn't about disrespecting her memory. It's about honoring her by being strategic and forward-thinking. I looked at my parents. Really looked at them. Searching for any sign that they saw through this. That they understood what Victoria was really doing. But all I saw was pride. Pride in her. Disappointment in me. I need time to think about it, I finally said. Dad's expression hardened. Time? Elena, this is a limited opportunity. The development company has other properties they're considering. If we don't move quickly, we'll lose this chance entirely. Then we lose it, I said, standing up from the table. I'm not signing anything tonight. I left the dining room before anyone could see the tears starting to form. I heard Mom call after me, her voice tight with frustration. I heard Dad say something about me always being difficult. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the dinner over and over in my mind. Something about the whole thing felt wrong. Too planned. Too perfect. Victoria had never shown any interest in the estate before. She'd always said Connecticut was boring. That the house was old and drafty. So why now? Why suddenly this passionate desire to turn it into a resort? I grabbed my laptop and started researching. The development company Victoria mentioned. The architects she'd supposedly been working with. Everything checked out on the surface. But the more I dug, the more questions I had. The company was legitimate, but small. Relatively new. And all of their previous projects had been much smaller scale than what Victoria was proposing. Something wasn't adding up. Over the next 2 weeks, the pressure intensified. Victoria stopped by my apartment almost daily, always with a new reason why I should sign the papers. New projections. New testimonials from potential investors. New renderings of what the resort could look like. She was relentless. And behind her was the constant weight of my parents' disappointment. Mom started calling less. When she did call, the conversations were short. Clipped. She'd ask if I'd changed my mind yet, and when I said no, she'd sigh like I was breaking her heart and find an excuse to hang up. Dad was even worse. He sent me articles about failed family businesses. Stories about siblings who couldn't agree and lost everything as a result. The message was clear. Fall in line or be cut out. But I held firm. Because something in my gut kept screaming that this was wrong. Then came the family gathering. The one Victoria organized. The one she invited everyone to. Extended family. Family friends. Even some of her social circle. She called it a celebration of new beginnings. I called it what it really was. A manipulation tactic. A way to publicly pressure me into agreeing by surrounding me with people who would all tell me what a wonderful opportunity this was. I almost didn't go. I sat in my car outside my parents' house for 20 minutes, debating whether I should just drive away. But something made me walk through that door. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the last shred of hope that someone, anyone, would be on my side. The house was full. Aunt Margaret was there with her husband. My cousins. Family friends I hadn't seen in years. And scattered throughout were Victoria's friends. Beautiful people in expensive clothes, holding champagne glasses and laughing at jokes I wasn't close enough to hear. Victoria was in her element. She was wearing a white dress. Cream-colored, actually, but in that lighting, it looked white. Like a bride. Like royalty. She floated from group to group, accepting congratulations and praise. I heard fragments of conversations as I moved through the crowd. She's always been so clever. Taking something old and making it new. That's vision. The family must be so proud. I felt invisible. I stood in the corner, holding a glass of wine I didn't want, watching my sister bask in glory for something that wasn't even hers yet. Something that required my consent but somehow everyone had already decided was a done deal. Mom found me eventually. She pulled me aside, her smile tight. "Please don't make a scene," she whispered. "Victoria has worked so hard to make this evening special." "Special for who?" I asked. She didn't answer. Just gave me a warning look and walked away. That's when I saw him. Almost too good to be true. In my experience, projects like this, especially in that location, the returns are usually much more modest. And the upfront costs? They're going to be massive. I'm talking tens of millions before you see a single dollar in profit. My heart started pounding. "Did you tell Victoria this?" He shook his head. I tried to bring it up once, casually. She shut it down pretty quickly. Said her team had done extensive research. Maybe they have. Maybe I'm wrong. But if I were in your position, I'd want an independent analysis before signing anything. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for telling me." He gave me a small smile. "Family can be complicated. Just make sure you're protecting yourself. That's all I'm saying." Before I could respond, Victoria appeared at my elbow. Her smile was bright, but her eyes were cold. "Elena, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." She looped her arm through mine, pulling me away from Marcus. "Come on, I want you to meet someone." She led me through the crowd to where Mom and Dad were standing with an older couple I vaguely recognized. Distant relatives, maybe. Victoria's grip on my arm was tight. Almost painful. "Everyone," Victoria announced, her voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby groups. "I want to make a toast." The room quieted. All eyes turned to us. I felt my face flush. This was it. This was the moment I'd been dreading. Victoria raised her glass. "I am so grateful to have you all here tonight. This project, this dream of turning our grandmother's estate into something beautiful and lasting, it means everything to me. And I couldn't have gotten this far without the support of my amazing family." She turned to look at me, and there it was again. That smile. But this time, I saw it for what it really was. Calculated. Strategic. A smile designed to corner me in front of everyone we knew. Especially my sister, Elena, she continued, squeezing my arm. "Who I know has some reservations, which is completely understandable. This is a big change. But I also know that she loves our family as much as I do. And I believe that when she really thinks about what's best for all of us, she'll make the right choice." The room erupted in polite applause. People were looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to say something, to agree, to fall in line. I felt trapped, suffocated. The walls were closing in and I couldn't breathe and everyone was staring and Victoria's grip on my arm was getting tighter and tighter and "I need some air," I managed to choke out. I pulled away from Victoria and pushed through the crowd, ignoring the confused looks and whispered comments. I made it to the back patio and leaned against the railing, gulping in the cool night air. This was psychological warfare. That's what this party was. A way to make me feel isolated and pressured and wrong for having doubts. A way to paint me as the villain for not immediately agreeing to Victoria's perfect plan. I stayed outside for a long time. Long enough that the party started winding down. Long enough that I heard people saying goodbye and cars starting in the driveway. When I finally went back inside, the house was quieter. Most of the guests had left. Victoria was in the kitchen, helping Mom clean up. They were laughing about something. Comfortable. Clothes. The way I used to be with Mom before all of this started. Dad found me in the hallway. His expression was stern. That was embarrassing, Elena, he said quietly. Walking out like that in the middle of Victoria's toast. She's been nothing but gracious to you through all of this, and you repay her by making a scene. I didn't make a scene, I protested. I just needed air. You made it clear to everyone in that room that you're not on board with this family decision, he said. Do you understand how that looks? How that makes us look? This isn't about how things look, Dad. This is about Grandma's legacy. This is about making sure we're not rushing into something that could be a huge mistake. He sighed, the disappointment radiating off him in waves. You've always been stubborn. Just like your grandmother, actually. But there comes a time when you have to put aside your own ego and think about what's best for the people around you. He walked away before I could respond. Left me standing there, alone in the hallway, feeling like a stranger in my own family home. I left shortly after that. Drove home in silence, my mind racing. Marcus's words kept echoing in my head. Something about the numbers doesn't sit right. I needed to know more. I needed to understand exactly what Victoria was proposing before I made any decisions. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not the family lawyer, someone else. Someone who had no connection to my parents or Victoria. I explained the situation and asked for his help in reviewing the contracts. I'll need copies of everything, he said. The will, the trust documents, the development proposal, all of it. I can get you the will and the trust documents, I told him. But I don't have copies of the development proposal. Victoria only showed me the overview that one time at dinner. Then we need to get them, he said firmly. You can't make an informed decision without seeing the full picture. And legally, if you're being asked to consent to a major change in the trust assets, you have the right to review all relevant documentation. That made sense. I called Victoria. The conversation was tense. Why do you need to see all the contracts? She asked, her voice tight with barely concealed irritation. Because I'm being asked to sign away my rights to an inheritance, I said. I think that warrants a thorough review. You don't trust me. This isn't about trust, Victoria. This is about being responsible. She was silent for a long moment. Then, fine. I'll have the documents sent over. But Elena, I really hope you're not trying to sabotage this. A lot of people are counting on this project moving forward. I'm not trying to sabotage anything, I said. I'm trying to make sure we're making the right decision. The documents arrived 2 days later. A massive envelope containing hundreds of pages of contracts, projections, architectural plans, and legal disclaimers. I forwarded everything to my lawyer and waited. His call came 3 days after that. I was at work, in the middle of reviewing patient charts, when my phone rang. I stepped into an empty conference room to take the call. Elena, we need to talk, he said, and the seriousness in his tone made my blood run cold. I've reviewed everything you sent me, and there are some significant concerns. What kind of concerns? First, the development company. I did some digging. They're legitimate, but they're also heavily in debt. They've got 2 other projects that are behind schedule and over budget. If they take on your grandmother's estate, there's a real risk they could overextend themselves and the whole thing could collapse. I felt sick. What happens if the project collapses? Worst case scenario? The property could end up in foreclosure. You and your sister could lose everything. Oh my God. That's not all, he continued. The contract Victoria has drafted, the one she's asking you to sign, it's not a simple consent form. It's a transfer of your ownership rights to a management company that Victoria has set up. If you sign this, You're not just agreeing to the development. You're giving up your direct claim to the property. Victoria would have complete control. The room spun. I grabbed the edge of the conference table to steady myself. She didn't tell me that, I whispered. She said I'd still get my share of the profits. She made it sound like we'd be equal partners. According to these documents, you'd be entitled to a percentage of net profits, yes. But Victoria's management company would control all decisions regarding the property, including whether and when to distribute those profits. She could effectively freeze you out. I closed my eyes, trying to process what I was hearing. This wasn't just about a resort. This was about Victoria taking everything. The house. The inheritance. My future. She was trying to cut me out completely, and she was doing it with a smile on her face and our parents cheering her on. What should I do? I asked. Don't sign anything, he said firmly. And I strongly suggest you get an independent appraisal of the property and a second opinion on the viability of this development project. If your sister is planning to move forward with this, you need to understand exactly what you're agreeing to. Or more importantly, what you're giving up. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat there in that empty conference room, staring at the wall, feeling the full weight of the betrayal settle over me. My sister wasn't just trying to take my inheritance. She was trying to rob me. And she was using our parents' approval and the pressure of family loyalty to make me complicit in my own destruction. But here's what Victoria didn't know. Here's what none of them knew. I'm not the quiet, compliant daughter they thought I was. I'm not the shadow who stands in the corner and accepts whatever scraps they throw my way. I'm my grandmother's granddaughter. And Grandma Catherine didn't raise me to be a victim. That night, I started digging. Really digging. If Victoria could spend months planning this takeover, then I could spend the time I had left uncovering the truth. I went back through all of Grandma's old papers. Letters. Financial statements. Personal journals. She'd been meticulous about documentation. And buried in her files, I found something interesting. A letter she'd written to her lawyer about 6 months before she died. In it, she expressed concerns about how her estate would be managed after she was gone. She specifically mentioned wanting to ensure that both her granddaughters would be protected and treated fairly. But there was another part of the letter that caught my attention. She mentioned a safety clause. A provision in the trust that would allow either beneficiary to request a full audit and review if they suspected mismanagement or manipulation of the inheritance. And if that audit revealed any wrongdoing, the person responsible would forfeit their share entirely. I read that paragraph 3 times, my heart pounding harder each time. Victoria didn't know about this clause. I was sure of it. Because if she did, she never would have been so brazen in her attempt to take control. I called my lawyer back immediately and told him what I'd found. He requested a full copy of the trust documents directly from Grandma's lawyer, and sure enough, the safety clause was there. Hidden in the dense legal language, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But very, very real. This changes everything, my lawyer said. If we can prove that Victoria has been manipulating you or misrepresenting the terms of the development deal, we can trigger this clause. She'd lose her entire inheritance. I don't want to take her inheritance, I said quickly. I just want to stop her from taking mine. I understand. But having this as leverage could be crucial. It means you're not just defending yourself. You're in a position of power. Power. It was a strange word to hear in the context of my relationship with Victoria. I'd never felt powerful around her. I'd always felt like I was playing catch-up. Like I was the supporting character in her story. But maybe it was time to rewrite the narrative. Over the next 3 weeks, I built my case. I hired a forensic accountant to review Victoria's financial projections. I got independent appraisals of the Connecticut property. I consulted with other real estate developers to assess the viability of the resort project. And with every piece of information I uncovered, the picture became clearer. Victoria's projections were wildly inflated. The development company was a disaster waiting to happen. And most damning of all, I discovered that Victoria had a personal financial stake in the management company she'd set up. She stood to make significantly more money than I would, even if the project succeeded. And if it failed, I'd lose everything while she'd be protected by layers of legal entities and limited liability clauses. It was a con. A sophisticated, well-planned con designed to look like a family business opportunity. And our parents had bought it completely. I compiled everything into a dossier. Every document. Every analysis. Every piece of evidence that proved what Victoria was really doing. It was damning. Irrefutable. And it was going to destroy her. But I didn't move yet. Because I needed the timing to be perfect. I needed the moment when she felt most secure, most confident, most certain that she'd won. That moment came exactly 4 weeks after the family gathering. Victoria called me, her voice practically singing with excitement. Elena, amazing news. The development company has officially committed. All we need now is your signature and we can start the process. I've set up a meeting for this Friday at Mom and Dad's house. Just us and the lawyers. We'll go through the final paperwork and make everything official. Friday, I repeated, my voice carefully neutral. I know you've had concerns, she said, and I could hear the smugness underneath her sympathetic tone. But I really think once you hear the lawyers explain everything, you'll feel so much better about all of this. This is going to be amazing for our family, Elena. For all of us. Okay, I said. I'll be there. Really? She sounded surprised. Like she'd expected more resistance. That's wonderful. I'm so glad you're finally seeing reason. Mom and Dad will be so relieved. I hung up the phone and looked down at the dossier on my desk. Everything I needed to destroy Victoria's plans. Everything I needed to protect myself and honor Grandma's real wishes. Friday couldn't come fast enough. The days crawled by. I went to work. I saw patients. I smiled and nodded and pretended everything was normal. But inside, I was counting down the hours until I could finally fight back. Thursday night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, running through every possible scenario. What Victoria might say. How my parents might react. Whether they'd believe me or stand by her. Part of me was terrified. But a bigger part of me was ready. Ready to stop being invisible. Ready to stop being the compliant daughter who let herself be pushed aside. Friday morning arrived cloudy and grey. Appropriate, I thought as I got dressed. I chose my outfit carefully. Professional. Conservative. The kind of clothes that said I was serious and couldn't be dismissed. I put the dossier in a leather briefcase that had been Grandma's. It felt fitting somehow. Like she was with me. I arrived at my parents' house at exactly 2 p.m. Victoria's car was already in the driveway, along with 2 other vehicles I didn't recognize. The lawyers, I assumed. Mom opened the door. She looked nervous. Elena, honey, I'm so glad you came, she said, ushering me inside. Victoria has been working so hard to make sure everything is perfect. Of course she has, I thought but didn't say. We walked into the dining room. The same room where this whole nightmare had started a month and a half ago. Victoria was there, looking radiant in a navy blue dress. Mom and Dad were seated on one side of the table. 2 lawyers, a man and a woman I didn't know, were on the other side. And there, at the head of the table, was a stack of papers. The contracts I was supposed to sign. Victoria smiled when she saw me. That smile. Elena. Come sit down. We're just about to get started. I sat down across from her, setting my briefcase carefully on the floor beside me. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Expectant. Relieved that I'd finally come around. One of the lawyers, the woman, cleared her throat. Ms. Elena, thank you for being here. I'm Rebecca Torres, and this is my colleague James Wu. We're here today to walk you through the final agreements and answer any questions you might have. Actually, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I have some questions before we begin. Victoria's smile tightened slightly. Of course. That's what we're here for. I turned to Rebecca. Can you explain to me, in simple terms, what happens to my ownership rights if I sign these documents? Rebecca glanced at Victoria, then back at me. You would be consenting to the development and transferring management authority to the entity your sister has established. You'd retain your financial interest in the property, of course, but the day-to-day decisions would be handled by the management company. So I'd give up control. Operational control, yes. But you'd still be entitled to your share of the proceeds. And what happens if the development fails? I asked. If the company goes bankrupt or the project collapses? What happens to the property then? Another glance between Rebecca and Victoria. Well, in that scenario, the property could potentially be at risk, but could it be foreclosed on? I interrupted. In a worst-case scenario, yes, and in that case, I'd lose my inheritance entirely. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Elena, I understand you're concerned, but Victoria and her team have done extensive due diligence to minimize those risks. Have they? I reached down and pulled out my briefcase. The room went very quiet. Because I've done some due diligence of my own. I opened the briefcase and pulled out the dossier. The weight of it on the table seemed to suck all the air out of the room. What is that? Victoria asked, her voice tight. This, I said, looking directly at her, is the truth. I pulled out the first document. The forensic accountant's report. Your financial projections are inflated by about 40%. The development company you want to work with is drowning in debt from failed projects. The realistic return on investment, if everything goes perfectly, would be less than half of what you've been telling everyone. Victoria's face started to lose color. That's not true. Your analysts work for you. I cut her off. I pulled out the next set of documents. And this is the part you really didn't want anyone to see. The management company you set up. You own 70% of it. Which means even if this project succeeds, you'd be taking 70% of the management fees, the operational profits, everything. While I'd be left with a minority stake in a property I no longer control. Elena, you're misunderstanding, Victoria started, but I wasn't done. I'm not misunderstanding anything, I said, my voice rising. You created a scheme to take my inheritance. You set up a structure where you'd profit no matter what happened, and I'd bear all the risk. And you convinced Mom and Dad to pressure me into going along with it. I turned to our parents. Mom looked shocked. Dad looked angry. At me or at Victoria, I couldn't tell yet. Did you know about this? I asked them. Did you know that Victoria set up a management company where she'd have complete control? Did you know that the development company is financially unstable? Did you know that if I signed these papers, I'd essentially be giving away my inheritance for pennies on the dollar? Victoria told us this was a sound investment, Dad said, but his voice was uncertain now. Victoria told you what she needed to tell you to get you on her side, I replied. I pulled out another document. And here's the really interesting part. I found Grandma's letter to her lawyer. The one where she established a safety clause in the trust. A clause that says if either beneficiary attempts to manipulate or defraud the other, they forfeit their entire share. The room went dead silent. Victoria's face was no longer just pale. It was white. Ghost white. You're bluffing, she whispered. Am I? I slid a copy of the trust document across the table, the relevant section highlighted in yellow. Read it yourself. Rebecca picked up the document, her eyes scanning the page. Her expression changed from confused to alarmed. She leaned over and whispered something to James, who also read the section. They both looked at Victoria with very different expressions than they'd had 5 minutes ago. Victoria, Rebecca said carefully, were you aware of this provision? Victoria didn't answer. She was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Like I was a stranger who'd just walked in wearing her sister's face. I want to make something very clear, I said, addressing everyone in the room now. I don't want to take Victoria's inheritance. I don't want this to become a legal battle. But I'm not signing away my rights. I'm not agreeing to a development plan that puts my future at risk so Victoria can profit. And I'm not going to stand by while my own family treats me like I'm too stupid or too weak to notice when I'm being conned. Elena, Mom started, her voice shaking. You can't possibly think that Victoria would. Mom, look at the documents, I said, not unkindly. Really look at them. Everything is right here. This isn't about me being paranoid or difficult. This is about Victoria creating a business structure designed to benefit herself at my expense. The numbers don't lie. Dad picked up the forensic accountant's report. He read it slowly, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finally looked up at Victoria, there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before when he looked at her. Doubt. Victoria, he said quietly, is this true? Did you set up a management company where you'd retain majority control? Victoria opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked lost. Like she couldn't find the words to spin this into something palatable. I was trying to protect the project, she finally said, her voice small. Someone needed to have final decision-making authority. I thought since I was the one doing all the work, coordinating everything, you thought you deserved a bigger share, I finished for her. You thought you could manipulate the structure so you'd come out ahead, and everyone would be so grateful for the opportunity that no one would look too closely at the details. That's not fair, Victoria said, and now there were tears in her eyes. Real or fake, I couldn't tell anymore. I've worked so hard on this. I've spent months putting this together. I was trying to do something good for our family. You were trying to steal from me, I said flatly. Let's call it what it is. The lawyers were very quiet now. They'd shifted from advocates to observers, clearly reassessing their involvement in this whole mess. Mom was crying. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. And Victoria? Victoria was finally starting to understand that her perfect plan had fallen apart. So what happens now? Dad asked, his voice heavy. I looked at each of them in turn. My parents, who'd chosen sides without knowing the full story. The lawyers, who were probably contemplating their liability in all this. And Victoria, who was staring at the table, her perfect composure finally cracking. Now, I said carefully, we do what we should have done from the beginning. We honor Grandma's actual wishes. The estate stays in the family. It doesn't get sold or developed. And when my birthday comes in 2 weeks, the inheritance gets split exactly the way Grandma intended. 50-50. Equal control. Equal shares. But the opportunity, Victoria started weakly. What opportunity? I cut her off. The opportunity to partner with a company that's already failing? The opportunity to turn our grandmother's home into a luxury resort that might never break even? Or the opportunity for you to control everything while I get pushed to the sidelines? She didn't answer. I stood up, gathering my documents back into the briefcase. I'm not signing anything today. And I'm instructing my lawyer to ensure that any future proposals regarding the estate require full financial disclosure and independent verification. No more secret management companies. No more inflated projections. No more manipulating Mom and Dad into pressuring me. I looked at the lawyers. I assume you'll need to inform your clients that this deal is dead. Rebecca nodded slowly. We'll need to review everything in light of this new information. But yes, I think it's safe to say we won't be moving forward as planned. Good. I picked up my briefcase and turned toward the door. Elena, wait. It was Mom. She stood up, her face streaked with tears. I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us you had concerns? Why didn't you come to us with this information instead of ambushing us like this? I turned back to face her, and I felt something break open inside my chest. All the hurt and anger and loneliness of the past 2 months came pouring out. I tried, Mom, I said, my voice shaking now. That first night at dinner, I told you I needed time to think about it. And what happened? You stopped calling me. Dad sent me articles about family businesses failing. You both made it very clear that if I didn't fall in line, I was the problem. I was the one being difficult and selfish and ungrateful. We didn't mean, she started. You made me feel like I was crazy for having doubts, I continued, the words coming faster now. You threw a party where Victoria was celebrated like royalty, and I stood in a corner feeling like a stranger in my own family. You chose her side before you even knew there were sides to choose. That's not fair, Dad said, standing up now too. We were trying to support what we thought was a good opportunity. You were trying to support Victoria, I corrected him. Like you always do. Do you know that you've never once asked me about medical school? About the program I got accepted to. About my dreams and my plans and my future. This whole time, it's been about Victoria's vision and Victoria's project and Victoria's ideas. I've been invisible to you for years, and I'm done pretending that doesn't hurt. The room was silent except for Mom's quiet crying. I'm your daughter too, I whispered. I deserved better than this. I walked out before anyone could respond. Before I could see the look on Victoria's face or hear whatever justification my parents might offer. I walked out of that house and got into my car and drove away, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. But the story doesn't end there. Because Victoria wasn't done. Not by a long shot. 3 days later, I got a call from my lawyer. We have a problem, he said. Victoria has filed a lawsuit. My blood went cold. What? She's claiming that you've been interfering with a legitimate business opportunity and that your actions have caused her financial harm. She's suing for damages and asking the court to force you to either consent to the development or buy out her share of the inheritance at fair market value. Can she do that? She can try. It's a regressive move, and honestly, given everything we've uncovered, I don't think she has a strong case. But it's going to be messy. And expensive. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it all settle over me. Victoria wasn't just going to walk away. She was going to fight. And she was going to use every weapon in her arsenal to try to win. What do we do? I asked. We fight back, he said simply. We file a counterclaim based on the safety clause in the trust. We present all the evidence of her attempted manipulation. And we let a judge decide who's in the right here. This is going to destroy our family, I said quietly. Elena, I'm sorry to say this, but I think the damage was already done. The question now is whether you're going to let her get away with it. He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. The lawsuit became public within days. Not in the newspapers or anything, but word spread through our family and social circles. People took sides. Some relatives called me to offer support. Others sent messages saying I was tearing the family apart over money. A few didn't say anything at all, which somehow hurt worse than the accusations. Mom tried to play mediator. She called constantly, begging us to work it out, to find a compromise. But there was no compromise to be found. Victoria wanted control of the inheritance. I wanted to protect what was rightfully mine. Those two positions couldn't coexist. Dad was harder to read. He stopped calling altogether. I heard through Aunt Margaret that he was furious with both of us. That he felt we were dishonouring Grandma's memory by fighting like this. I wanted to scream. To tell him that I was the one trying to honour Grandma's memory by protecting her estate from a predatory development scheme. But he wouldn't have listened. The legal process was brutal. Depositions. Discovery. Mountains of paperwork. Victoria's lawyers tried every angle they could find. They claimed I was mentally unstable. That my judgment was compromised by jealousy. That I'd always resented Victoria's success and this was my way of sabotaging her. It was character assassination disguised as legal strategy. But I had the truth on my side. And more importantly, I had evidence. My lawyer was brilliant. He systematically dismantled every argument Victoria's team made. He brought in expert witnesses who confirmed that the development company was financially unstable. He presented the forensic accountant's analysis showing how Victoria's projections were fraudulent. He walked the judge through the management company structure and showed exactly how Victoria had designed it to benefit herself at my expense. And through it all, Victoria sat in that courtroom looking like the victim. Crying at strategic moments. Talking about how she'd only wanted to help the family. How she couldn't understand why her sister hated her so much. It made me sick. The trial lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sitting in a cold courtroom, watching my family's dirty laundry get aired for strangers to judge. 3 weeks of avoiding eye contact with Victoria across the aisle. 3 weeks of hoping that justice would actually prevail. On the final day, the judge delivered his ruling. He found in my favor on almost every count. He determined that Victoria had indeed attempted to manipulate the inheritance structure for her own benefit. He ruled that her lawsuit was without merit and dismissed it with prejudice. And then, in a moment that still gives me chills when I think about it, he addressed the safety clause. Based on the evidence presented, the judge said, looking directly at Victoria, the court finds that Ms. Victoria engaged in deliberate misrepresentation and manipulation regarding the family trust. Under the terms of the trust's safety provision, such actions constitute grounds for forfeiture. Victoria's face went white. Her lawyer started to object, but the judge held up his hand. However, he continued, the court also recognizes that this is a family matter, and that enforcing the full forfeiture would serve primarily to punish rather than to achieve justice. Therefore, the court's ruling is as follows: the estate will be divided as originally intended, with equal shares to both beneficiaries. Ms. Victoria is prohibited from taking any action to develop, sell, or otherwise alter the property without Ms. Elena's written consent. Any violation of this order will result in immediate forfeiture of Ms. Victoria's share in its entirety. Additionally, Ms. Victoria is ordered to pay all legal costs incurred by Ms. Elena in defending against this frivolous lawsuit. The gavel came down. It was over. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like I'd been in a war. Battered. Exhausted. But victorious. Victoria didn't speak to me. She didn't even look at me. She just gathered her things and left, her lawyers trailing behind her like defeated soldiers. Mom was waiting in the hallway. She hugged me, but it felt hollow. Like she was going through the motions because she was supposed to, not because she wanted to. I hope you're happy, she said quietly. I'm not happy, Mom, I replied. But I'm not a victim anymore either. She didn't respond to that. Just pulled away and went to find Victoria. Dad didn't come to the courthouse at all. The aftermath was strange. Quiet. Like the world had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. The inheritance was distributed on my 27th birthday, exactly as Grandma had intended. I received my share of the money, the stocks, and 50% ownership of the Connecticut estate. Victoria received the same. But she couldn't do anything with it. Couldn't sell it. Couldn't develop it. Couldn't turn it into her luxury resort dream. It was frozen in place, and I held the key. I thought about what to do with it for a long time. Part of me wanted to sell my half just to be done with the whole thing. To cut all ties and move on with my life. But every time I visited the estate, walking through the rooms where Grandma had lived and loved and raised her family, I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I came up with a different plan. I established a foundation in Grandma Catherine's name. A non-profit dedicated to providing scholarships for women pursuing careers in medicine and business. The Connecticut estate became the foundation's headquarters. We renovated it carefully, preserving its character while making it functional for our purposes. And now, instead of being a luxury resort for the wealthy, it's a place where young women come for mentorship programs, leadership workshops, and educational retreats. Everything Grandma believed in. Everything she would have wanted. I didn't ask Victoria's permission. I didn't need to. The foundation didn't require selling or developing the property, just using it. And since I was covering all the costs and managing everything, there was nothing she could do to stop me. She found out about it 3 months after we opened. I heard through the family grapevine that she was furious. That she felt I'd stolen her vision and twisted it into something else. But she never called me. Never reached out. The silence between us became permanent. Mom and Dad came to the foundation's opening ceremony. They looked uncomfortable the whole time, standing awkwardly near the refreshment table while I gave my speech about Grandma's legacy and the importance of empowering the next generation of women leaders. After the ceremony, Dad pulled me aside. "This is nice, Elena," he said, and I could tell the words cost him something. "Your grandmother would have approved." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even really a compliment. But it was the closest thing to acknowledgement I was going to get from him. "Thank you," I said. "Victoria is still your sister," he added, his voice dropping. "I hope someday you two can find your way back to each other." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw an old man who didn't want to admit that his golden child had feet of clay. Who couldn't reconcile the daughter he'd put on a pedestal with the person who'd tried to steal from her own sister. "Maybe," I said, though I didn't believe it. Maybe someday. But here's the thing they don't tell you about revenge. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. When I stood in that courtroom and heard the judge rule in my favor, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. When I cut the ribbon at the foundation's opening, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt sad. Because winning meant losing my family. Protecting myself meant destroying the illusion that we'd ever really been united in the first place. The foundation thrived though. In the first year, we awarded scholarships to 23 young women. We hosted 4 major workshops and 2 leadership conferences. The estate, which had been gathering dust and memories, came alive again with the sound of ambitious women planning their futures. I threw myself into the work. It was easier than dealing with the hollowness in my personal life. Easier than admitting that I was now essentially an orphan with living parents. That I'd won the battle but lost something I couldn't quite name. Then, about 8 months after the trial, something unexpected happened. I was at the foundation, working late in what used to be Grandma's study, when the doorbell rang. We weren't expecting anyone. The estate was closed for the day. But I went to answer it anyway, curious. This was my space now. My domain. The foundation is beautiful, she said, looking around. I looked at your website. What you're doing here, it's really impressive. Thank you. More silence. She fidgeted with her hands, clearly uncomfortable. I waited. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. I came to apologize, she finally said, the words coming out in a rush. For everything. For the lawsuit. For trying to manipulate the inheritance. For turning Mom and Dad against you. For all of it. I studied her face, trying to determine if this was real or just another manipulation. Another angle. What changed? I asked. She laughed bitterly. Everything. Losing the lawsuit destroyed my reputation in the business community. The development company dropped me. Half my friends stopped returning my calls. And the other half only wanted to gossip about the trial. I went from being the golden child to being the sister who tried to steal her inheritance. It's been humbling, to say the least. So you're apologizing because you lost, I said. No. She met my eyes directly. I'm apologizing because I was wrong. It took losing everything for me to see it, but I was wrong. I convinced myself that I deserved more because I'd worked harder. Because I was the one with the business vision and the connections. I told myself I was doing it for the family, but really, I was doing it for me. For my ego. For my need to be the successful one, the important one. She took a shaky breath. I didn't see you, Elena. I saw an obstacle. Someone who was in the way of what I wanted. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I wanted to believe her. Part of me desperately wanted to accept this apology and try to rebuild something from the wreckage of our relationship. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt and betrayed and gaslit, stayed guarded. Why now? I asked. Why come here 8 months later? Because it took me 8 months to understand what I'd really lost, she said. It wasn't the money or the estate or the business opportunity. It was you. It was having a sister. I spent so much time competing with you, trying to be better than you, that I never just tried to know you. And now I don't know if it's too late to fix that. She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't think I deserve that. But I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. That I see what I did. That I understand why you don't trust me and probably never will again. And that if there's ever a chance, even a small one, that we could start over, I'd like to try. I sat there, processing her words. Looking for the lie. The angle. The manipulation. But all I saw was my sister. Broken and humbled and real in a way she'd never been before. I need time, I finally said. A lot of time. What you did, it wasn't just about money. You made me feel worthless. You turned our parents against me. You smiled while you tried to destroy my future. That's not something I can just get over because you show up and say you're sorry. I know, she said quietly. I know. But, I continued, surprising myself, I'm not saying never. I'm saying not now. Maybe someday we can figure out what a relationship between us looks like. But it won't be what it was before. It can't be. Too much has happened. She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Thank you. For not slamming the door completely. That's more than I deserve. She turned to leave, but I stopped her. Victoria? She turned back. The foundation does an annual gala. Fundraising event. We need volunteers for the planning committee. If you're serious about making amends, about supporting what Grandma would have wanted, you could help with that. Her eyes widened. Really? It's not forgiveness, I clarified. It's an opportunity. What you do with it is up to you. A small, genuine smile crossed her face. The first real smile I'd seen from her in years. I'll be there. Just tell me when and where. After she left, I sat in that study for a long time, staring at Grandma's portrait on the wall. She looked stern in the painting, but I remembered her laugh. Her warmth. The way she'd always told me that strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about choosing to stand back up. I'm standing, I whispered to her picture. I'm standing, and I'm building something good. I hope that makes you proud. The months that followed were strange. Victoria showed up for the gala planning meetings. She was quiet, deferential, nothing like the commanding presence she used to be. She worked hard, took direction, and never tried to take over or redirect the vision. It was unsettling at first. Like watching a completely different person wear my sister's face. But slowly, carefully, something began to shift. We started talking about things other than the foundation. Small things at first. A TV show we both liked. A funny thing that happened at work. Nothing deep. Nothing that touched on the pain between us. But it was something. She started working with non-profit consulting, helping other organizations develop sustainable business models. She was good at it. Better than she'd been at the cutthroat world of real estate development. She found purpose in building things that mattered rather than things that just looked impressive. We still weren't close. Not like sisters in movies or books. But we were learning how to be in each other's lives without causing destruction. Learning how to communicate without assuming the worst. Learning how to exist as two separate people instead of two sides of a competition. One evening, almost 2 years after the trial, Victoria and I were at the estate, setting up for a scholarship award ceremony. We were hanging decorations in the main hall, working in comfortable silence, when she suddenly spoke. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found that safety clause in the trust? I paused, holding a banner. Sometimes. Why? I would have one, she said quietly. If you hadn't found that clause, if you hadn't built such a strong case, I would have gotten away with it. I would have taken your inheritance and convinced myself I deserved it. Probably, I agreed. She climbed down from the ladder she'd been standing on and looked at me directly. I think about that a lot. About how close I came to destroying you. To destroying us. And I'm grateful you fought back. I know that sounds strange, but I am. Because if you hadn't, I never would have had to face what I'd become. I would have just kept taking and taking, convinced I was entitled to everything I wanted. You're right, I said. That does sound strange. She smiled slightly. I'm trying to say thank you. For not letting me get away with it. For being strong enough to stand up for yourself even when it meant going to war with the whole family. You saved both of us that day in that dining room, even though I was too blind to see it. I set down the banner and sat on one of the chairs we'd arranged for the ceremony. She sat next to me. I didn't feel strong, I admitted. I felt terrified. Standing up to you, to Mom and Dad, it felt like jumping off a cliff. I wasn't sure I'd survive the fall. But you did survive. More than survive. You built this. She gestured around at the transformed estate. You took something that was just money and property and turned it into something that changes people's lives. That takes real strength. We sat there for a moment, two sisters who'd torn each other apart and were slowly, painfully, learning how to be whole again. I don't think we'll ever be like we were when we were kids, I said. Before all the competition and resentment. No, she agreed. But maybe we can be something better. Something more honest. The ceremony that night was beautiful. 20 young women received scholarships. Each one stood up and talked about their dreams, their challenges, their determination to succeed despite the obstacles in their way. I watched their faces as they spoke, saw their hope and fire and refusal to be held back, and I felt something settle in my chest. This was why I'd fought. Not for revenge. Not to hurt Victoria or prove my parents wrong. I'd fought to protect the legacy of a woman who believed in empowering others. Who believed that strength came from lifting people up, not tearing them down. After the ceremony, after all the guests had left and the caterers had packed up, I stood alone in the main hall. The same hall where Grandma used to host Christmas dinners and birthday parties. Where generations of our family had gathered. I thought about that dinner 2 years ago. About sitting at the table while Victoria smiled and my parents praised her and I felt invisible. About the rage and hurt and determination that had driven me to uncover the truth. Revenge isn't what they show you in movies. It's not some satisfying moment where the villain gets exactly what they deserve and everyone applauds. It's messy. It's painful. It costs you things you didn't expect to lose. But sometimes, it's necessary. Not because you want to hurt someone, but because you need to protect yourself. To draw a line and say this is where I stand and you can't push me any further. I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret exposing Victoria's scheme or taking her to court or refusing to be bullied into giving up what was mine. But I also don't celebrate it. Because the cost was high. The cost was a family fractured, relationships damaged, trust shattered. The real victory wasn't beating Victoria in court. It was reclaiming my voice. My power. My right to be seen and heard and valued. And the real success wasn't the money or the estate or even the foundation, as much as I loved it. The real success was learning that I could survive being hated by the people I loved. That I could stand alone if I had to. That my worth wasn't dependent on their approval. 3 years after that fateful dinner, my life looks nothing like I thought it would. I run a successful foundation. I have a career helping young women achieve their dreams. My relationship with my family is complicated but improving. Victoria and I talk regularly now. We're not best friends. We probably never will be. But we're sisters again. Different than before. More careful. More honest. Mom and I have coffee once a month. We talk about surface things mostly. She still has trouble acknowledging how deeply she hurt me. But she shows up. She asks about the foundation. She's trying in her own limited way. Dad is slower to change. But he donated to the foundation last year. A substantial amount. He didn't make a big deal about it. Just sent a check with a note that said keep doing good work. It's not an apology. But it's something. Last month, I was going through some of Grandma's old things in the attic of the estate. Boxes of letters and photographs and mementos. And I found a journal she'd kept during the last year of her life. In it, she wrote about her fears for Victoria and me. About how she worried that Victoria's drive for success would consume her. About how she worried that I was too accommodating, too willing to fade into the background. She wrote about the safety clause she'd put in the trust and why. My girls need to learn, she wrote in shaky handwriting, that family is precious but it cannot be everything. That sometimes you have to protect yourself even from the people you love. That strength and kindness are not opposites but partners. I pray they never need this provision I've put in place. But if they do, I hope it teaches them both what they need to learn. That you can be soft and still unbreakable. That you can forgive and still have boundaries. That you can love someone and still refuse to let them destroy you. I sat in that dusty attic and cried. For Grandma. For the girl I used to be. For Victoria and the person she could have been if she'd never gone down that path. For the family we'd almost lost to greed and pride and the desperate need to feel valuable. But I also cried with gratitude. Because Grandma had seen us. Really seen us. And she'd left us the tools we needed to save ourselves. People ask me sometimes if I'm happy now. If winning was worth it. If I'd do it all over again knowing what it would cost. The answer is complicated. I'm not happy the way I would be if none of this had happened. If Victoria and I had just split the inheritance peacefully and moved on with our lives. But I'm satisfied. I'm proud of what I built. I'm grateful for the strength I found in myself. And yes, I'd do it again. Because the alternative was letting myself be erased. Letting my sister steal from me while I smiled and pretended everything was fine. Letting my parents treat me like my feelings and my rights didn't matter. I chose to stand up. To fight back. To demand to be seen. That choice changed everything. It cost me the illusion of a perfect family. But it gave me something more valuable. It gave me myself. So when people ask what I would do in that situation, I tell them this: know your worth. Protect what's yours. Don't let anyone, not even family, make you feel like you don't deserve to take up space. And if you have to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, choose dignity every time. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who has to live with yourself. You're the one who has to look in the mirror and know whether you stood up or stood down. Whether you let them win or whether you fought for what was right. I chose to fight. And that night, when I stood up with those papers in my hand and watched Victoria's face turn pale and everyone froze in shock, that wasn't just the beginning of my revenge. It was the beginning of my freedom. Nothing was ever the same again after that moment. But that's exactly how it needed to be. The foundation is hosting its annual gala next month. Victoria is on the planning committee again. Mom and Dad will be there. Extended family. Friends. Scholarship recipients and their families. It will be beautiful and meaningful and proof that something good can be built from the ashes of betrayal. And when I stand up to give my speech, I'll look out at all those faces and I'll remember that girl who stood in the corner feeling invisible. Who smiled and nodded while her sister plotted to take everything. Who almost let it happen because she was too afraid to cause conflict. And I'll be grateful that she found her voice. That she refused to disappear. That she turned her pain into purpose and her rage into resilience. That's the real revenge story. Not destruction but transformation. Not tearing someone down but building yourself up. Not winning at someone else's expense but refusing to lose yourself in the process. Victoria smiled while taking my inheritance. She thought I'd stay silent forever. Mom and Dad praised her like a queen while I stood invisible in the corner. But I didn't stay silent. I didn't stay invisible. And when I finally spoke up, when I finally stepped out of that corner and into the light, everything changed. My revenge wasn't destroying Victoria. It was refusing to be destroyed. It was taking back my power and using it to create something beautiful. It was learning that I could survive being the villain in their story if it meant being the hero in my own. And that night, that pivotal night when I stood up with those papers, when I exposed the truth and watched the perfect facade crumble, my revenge had just begun. But it didn't end with winning a lawsuit or getting my inheritance. It ended with becoming the woman my grandmother always knew I could be. Strong. Unbreakable. Free. What would you do in this situation? If your own family betrayed you, if they smiled while they tried to steal your future, would you have the courage to fight back? Would you risk losing everything to protect what's rightfully yours? Tell me in the comments because I want to know. I want to know if you'd have the strength to turn pain into power the way I did. And if this story resonated with you, if you felt every moment of betrayal and triumph right alongside me, hit that like button and subscribe. Because life is full of moments where you have to choose between being comfortable and being true to yourself. And I'm here to tell the stories of people who chose truth, no matter how high the cost. Thank you for listening to my story. To the story of how I was buried alive by the people who were supposed to love me most. And how I clawed my way back from that grave to build something they never expected. A life worth living. A legacy worth leaving. And a strength they could never take away. Don't let anyone, not even family, make you feel like you don't deserve to take up space. And if you have to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, choose dignity every time. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who has to live with yourself. You're the one who has to look in the mirror and know whether you stood up or stood down. Whether you let them win or whether you fought for what was right. I chose to fight. And that night, when I stood up with those papers in my hand and watched Victoria's face turn pale and everyone froze in shock, that wasn't just the beginning of my revenge. It was the beginning of my freedom. Nothing was ever the same again after that moment. But that's exactly how it needed to be. The foundation is hosting its annual gala next month. Victoria is on the planning committee again. Mom and Dad will be there. Extended family. Friends. Scholarship recipients and their families. It will be beautiful and meaningful and proof that something good can be built from the ashes of betrayal. And when I stand up to give my speech, I'll look out at all those faces and I'll remember that girl who stood in the corner feeling invisible. Who smiled and nodded while her sister plotted to take everything. Who almost let it happen because she was too afraid to cause conflict. And I'll be grateful that she found her voice. That she refused to disappear. That she turned her pain into purpose and her rage into resilience. That's the real revenge story. Not destruction but transformation. Not tearing someone down but building yourself up. Not winning at someone else's expense but refusing to lose yourself in the process. Victoria smiled while taking my inheritance. She thought I'd stay silent forever. Mom and Dad praised her like a queen while I stood invisible in the corner. But I didn't stay silent. I didn't stay invisible. And when I finally spoke up, when I finally stepped out of that corner and into the light, everything changed. My revenge wasn't destroying Victoria. It was refusing to be destroyed. It was taking back my power and using it to create something beautiful. It was learning that I could survive being the villain in their story if it meant being the hero in my own. And that night, that pivotal night when I stood up with those papers, when I exposed the truth and watched the perfect facade crumble, my revenge had just begun. But it didn't end with winning a lawsuit or getting my inheritance. It ended with becoming the woman my grandmother always knew I could be. Strong. Unbreakable. Free. What would you do in this situation? If your own family betrayed you, if they smiled while they tried to steal your future, would you have the courage to fight back? Would you risk losing everything to protect what's rightfully yours? Tell me in the comments because I want to know. I want to know if you'd have the strength to turn pain into power the way I did. And if this story resonated with you, if you felt every moment of betrayal and triumph right alongside me, hit that like button and subscribe. Because life is full of moments where you have to choose between being comfortable and being true to yourself. And I'm here to tell the stories of people who chose truth, no matter how high the cost. Thank you for listening to my story. To the story of how I was buried alive by the people who were supposed to love me most. And how I clawed my way back from that grave to build something they never expected. A life worth living. A legacy worth leaving. And a strength they could never take away.